Dear students, welcome to online class arranged by National University. I'm happy to be this part of this journey. I hope that this class will be very helpful for the students of B Honors Part 1 in English department. Dear students, as you see on the screen, that our today's topic of discussion is I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King. This is for B Honors Part 1 and the course code is 211107. Today we should be discussing on I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr. And I'm Muhammad Ishtiaq Hassan, Assistant Professor, Department of English at Dhaka City College. As you see on the screen that Martin Luther King Jr. speech is one of the significant speeches in the world. And in our today's class, we'll be focusing on different parts of the speech. Let us see our today's lecture at a glance about the author, key facts, summary of the space, discussion of the space, questions, summary of the lecture, and finally, we'll be giving the final touch of our today's lecture. So let's see some of this important information about Martin Luther King Jr. As you see on the screen that he was born in 1929 and died in 1968, an American Baptist minister, activist, humanitarian, leader in the African American civil rights movement, best known for his role in the advancement of civil rights using non-violent civil disobedience. He is one of the greatest orators in American history, received the Nobel Peace Prize for combating racial inequality. So throughout his life, he has worked for the freedom of the black people. And if we just see that we'll find Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929, and he died on April 4, 1968. He was an American Christian minister and activist who became the most visible spokesperson and leader in the civil rights movement from 1955 until his assassination in 1968. He was killed. King is best known for advancing civil rights through non-violence and civil disobedience, and he was inspired by the Christian beliefs and the non-violent activism of Mahatma Gandhi. King led the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott and later became the first president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. As president of the SCLC, he led an unsuccessful 1962 struggle against segregation in Albany, Georgia, and helped organize the movement non-violent 1963 protests in Alabama. King helped organize the 1963 March on Washington, where he delivered his famous speech, I Have a Dream, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. So his speech is one of the important milestones in the history of establishing human freedom and dignity. And it is also found that he was very much instrumental in finding out the misdoings in America by the other people, because the black people are segregated in different places, and he expressed his desire to uphold these issues in front of the nation. Now let us move on to our next slide. So let us see some of the important information about the space. As you can see that it was delivered on August 28, 1963. The place was Lincoln Memorial, Washington, D.C. And here 250,000 people gathered. And it is called a defining moment of the American civil rights movement. So the rights of the people were not established, and he expressed his desire to talk about the freedom of these people. So as we also find that I Have a Dream is a public space. It was delivered by American civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom on August 20th, 1963, in which he called for civil and economic rights and an end to racism in the United States. Delivered to over 250,000 civil rights supporters from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., the speech was a defining moment of the civil rights movement and among the most iconic speeches in American history. Beginning with a reference to the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared millions of slaves free in 1863, King said, 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. Toward the end of this speech, King departed from his prepared text for a partly improvised theme, I Have a Dream, prompted by Mahalia Jackson's cry, Tell them about the dream, Martin. In this part of his speech, which most excited the listeners and now became it most famous, King described his dreams of freedom and equality arising from a land of slavery and hatred. This speech was ranked the top American speech of the 20th century in a 1999 poll of scholars of public address. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was partly intended to demonstrate mass support for the civil rights legislation proposed by President Kennedy in June. Martin Luther King and other leaders therefore agreed to keep their speeches calm, also to avoid provoking the civil disobedience which had become the hallmark of the civil rights movement. King originally designed his speech as a homage to Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, timed to correspond with the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation. So we can understand some of this background. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was partly intended to demonstrate mass support for the civil rights legislation proposed by President Kennedy in June. So in this regard, we see that the March on Washington speech has been shown to have several versions written at different times. It is no single version draft, but is a combination of several drafts and was originally called Normalcy Never Again. Little of his other Normalcy space ended up in the final draft. This piece was drafted with the assistance of Stanley Levison and Clarence Benjamin Jones in Riverdale, New York City. Jones has said that the logistical preparations for the march were so burdensome that this piece was not a priority for us, and that on the evening of Tuesday, August 27, Martin still didn't know what he was going to say. And we see that King refers to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, describes the document as a promissory note, whose promise has not been fulfilled for African Americans. Therefore, King says he has come to Washington for the rights of the African Americans. King goes on to declare that the time has come to make justice a reality for all in the United States. He describes the situation as urgent, stating that the growing discontent among the Black Americans will not go until equality is won. And it is seen that he designed his speech as a homage to Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and which also showed that he gave this speech after 100 years of Abraham Lincoln. And it is also found that the condition of the blacks in America was not good enough. And there are some segregations, and people had to stay in different places. They are segregated. They are not allowed to sit in the bus. So everything was segregated in the society. And we see that he was greatly influenced by Mahatma Gandhi's non-violent movement. His philosophy was that he won't do any kind of atrocity in order to get their demand. So he was very much calm and quiet in his justification of that gaining the rights of common men. So he says that there will not be peace in America until African Americans are granted their rights as American citizens. Though the situation is urgent, King stresses that his fellow African Americans protesters should neither resort to violence nor blame all white people, for there are white civil rights protesters among them in the audience. Fighting alongside them, the struggle for equality must continue until police brutality is no longer a concern for African Americans. Hotels no longer turn them away. Ghettos are not their only option. So the places where they have to live, so there will be no fixed places for their living. They could live anywhere they wish. And voting rights are universal until justice is served. So the black Americans are not given the voting rights. So a kind of mismanagement was happening in the USA. And in order to get the demand of the rights of the black people, he has demanded his uh, words in front of the people in America. King acknowledges that protesting has been difficult for many. Some of those present have recently been in prison or have suffered other persecutions. He promises that their struggle will be rewarded and encourages his listeners to return to their home states filled with new hope. King famously declares, "I have a dream," and describes his hope for a future America where blacks and whites will sit and eat together. It is a world in which children will no longer be judged by their skin color, and black and white alike will join hands. King calls upon his listeners to look into his vision of America, to give them hope to keep fighting, and asserts when freedom is allowed to ring from every part of the nation, the United States will be what it should have always been. Justice will be achieved. So we see the important aspects of this speech. King's speech invokes the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the United States Constitution. Early in his speech, King alludes to Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address by saying 5 score years ago. So he has presented some of the important documents in his speech, and he has also brought those things in front of the people. Uh, we can see that he has talked for the black Americans, that is African Americans, and we see that he was very much in favor of the black people, and he has also shown that for any kind of protest, how it could be done in a very calm and quiet manner. And we also see that his space has also made some tremendous effects on the people. King repeatedly urges his listeners not to give into violence, no matter how violently they are treated. In doing so, he appeals to the power of sufferings, a concept common to many Christian traditions. He also reiterates his belief that Americans of all races will be best served by a society in which they live together peacefully. Neither of these ideas, racial integration and nonviolence, was universally shared by African Americans for civil rights in the early 1960s. In fact, King was frequently criticized by members of the nation. This was a black nationalist group that adopted its own interpretation, and we see that he was always for the uh, common people, the black people. And he has also presented some of these historical documents in order to show that how it is important for the rights of the black people. Here we also see that In reference to the abolition of slavery articulated in the Emancipation Proclamation, King says it came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. So slavery is one of the most heinous acts in the USA, and the black people were treated as slaves. And we see that in the proclamation, in the abolition of slavery by Abraham Lincoln, we find that it came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of the captivity. But after 100 years, it is seen that the black are not free in this nation. They had to suffer all kinds of problems in the society. They are not allowed to go to any place. They are not given the rights of voting rights. So we find a lot of things are happening against them, and they didn't find any other way to uphold themselves as free people in the society. So important aspects of this speech, if we just talk about that, early in his speech, King argues his audience to seize the moment. Now is the time. So this is the time that people should come out of their home and to protest. But every time he has talked about the protest in a calm and quiet manner. And now is the time is repeated 3 times in the 6th paragraph. The most widely cited example of anaphora is found in the often quoted phrase, "I have a dream," which is repeated 8 times. So we also see that these things have been repeated in different times in his speech. And King paints a picture of an integrated and unified America for his audience. Include 100 years later, we can never be satisfied with his faith, let freedom ring and free at last. So these are the lines that we find in most of the cases. And he has a desire of a free nation, or everyone will be judged not by their color of the skin, but by their thoughts and their imagination. So what message do you get from the speech of Martin Luther King Jr.? The ideas in the speech reflecting social experience of ethnocentric abuse, the mistreatment and exploitation of the blacks, to give African Americans the freedom and equality they deserve. So we see that he wants to see a nation where everyone will live in a peaceful society, where everyone will get their demands. And this is his dream, that he thinks that it will come true on one day. And for this hope, he actually goes on saying that I have a dream in repeated times, and how his dream will be fulfilled. So it is his desire that his dreams will be fulfilled one day. So main points of this space, and we see that the American dream. So what is American dream? What do we mean by the American dream? So the American dream is deeply rooted. We see that in his space, the American dream is rooted, and we need to know how the American dream is found here. The American dream is a national ethos of the United States, the set of ideals, democracy, rights, liberty, opportunity, and equality, in which freedom includes the opportunity for prosperity and success, as well as upward social mobility for the family and children, achieved through hard work in a society with few barriers. In the definition of the American Dream by James Troslow Adam in 1931, life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with the opportunity for each according to ability and achievement, regardless of social class or circumstances. The American dream is rooted in the Declaration of Independence, which proclaims that all men are created equal, with the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Also, the US Constitution promotes similar freedom in the preamble to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So we find that in American dream that everyone will get the benefits, everyone will have the freedom in the society, and there will be no discrimination. He wants a society which is free from all kinds of discrimination, and he wants a very peaceful time happening with the society. And people all walks of life will enjoy the same benefits. And for this reason, he has always talked about the American dream. And the American dream should be utilized, should be meant for all kinds of people, for both black and the white. And for freedom, it is the birthright of a human being. And when freedom is snatched away, or when people are deprived of their freedom, they cannot do anything, because the freedom, there are some mental pictures associated with freedom. So when we think that we are free and we can do a lot of things, it means that we can achieve more in our free state. So freedom is one of the important aspects for a human being to achieve it. So if we just talk about the style of this piece, we can see that the first half portrays not an idealized American dream, but a picture of a seething American nightmare of racial injustice. So from the very beginning of this piece, Martin Luther King has talked about the various kind of sufferings the Black Americans face in the society, because they think that they don't have any place to go, their place is fixed, and people do not take them in the right way. Everywhere they are subjugated, they are segregated in most of the places. So this kind of thing has actually made the life of the black people. In some of the places, we also find the word Negro. So the word Negro in some cases is derogatory, and it means a bad word against the people. The second half of this piece paints the dream of a better, fairer future of racial harmony and integration. In that, we also find that he wants a society which is free from all kinds of discrimination. The black people and the white people will sit together, they will eat together, they will pray together. And he also talks about the children of the black people and the white people. They will act as brothers and sisters. They will eat in the table of brotherhood, and they will share their joys, their feelings, their sufferings with each other. So Martin Luther King has seen the picture of a society which is free from any kind of problems. The society will be peaceful, and everyone will enjoy the same benefits, irrespective of caste, creed, and religion. So we need to know what are the dreams of Martin Luther King. For the dreams of Martin Luther King, his only one dream, among other dreams, is the freedom and the equality in the society. His I Have a Dream can be considered one of the greatest speeches in American history. And when he delivered his speech, 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. on 28th of August 1963. And his groundbreaking speech also inspired everyone. His dream is the equal rights of all the black and white people of America. King argues that all men are equal and should be treated equally. Many times in his speech, King states how black citizens have been mistreated over the years. In the beginning of his speech, King states 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. King also states numerous times his dream for equality in the country. He says, I have a dream my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So King uses many historical documents to support his argument. The first document he mentions is the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order signed by President Lincoln, freeing the slaves in the Confederate States. It was the first step in equality for African Americans. King also mentions the United States Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So from these documents, he wants to present that the freedom is given in the historical, in the document, but in reality, people are not free. Martin was clearly dreaming about a future with racial equality, where people are not judged by the color of their skin, religion, gender, but by the character and the person they are inside. So the color of the skin is not the only way of judging a person, or not the religion, or not the gender. It is the character of the person by which he or she should be judged in the society. So this was the dream that Martin Luther King has always dreamt for the nation. Martin uses some rhetorical methods, including repetition, metaphors, identification, and persuasion in his speech. So we find that he quotation from the line, quotation from the text, but we refuse to believe that the bank of justice is bankrupt. He meant that there is injustice in the world, but there is a chance to fix it. The language and diction made the space more powerful and effective. Imagery is also used to help the audience's understanding of the space. For instance, in the space, King creates images of equality and togetherness with his quote from his speech. One day, writes, there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. The speech is directed towards King's fellow Americans. Throughout the speech, King uses the word we and our when referring to others. King is not speaking specifically to white Americans or black Americans. Rather, he talks about the whole people. He says we cannot walk alone. So they cannot walk alone. They need the help of all the people. The black and the white people are needed in order to make a good society, a peaceful society. And it is his dream that he wants to materialize. The feelings and power of his speech gave a stunning blow to the people of America. Taking the path of non-violent movement, King dreams of a nation which will be free from racial segregation. It is his earnest expectation that freedom will ring from every corner of America. His speech is truly a charter of freedom and equality for the black people of America. Dreams of Martin Luther King are presented through his speech, I Have a Dream. And we also know about his dreams from that space. And this space is considered one of the significant spaces in world history. And we know that there was a history behind this space. So the Alabama bus boycotts of 1955 to 1956, considered to be the starting point of the civil rights movement. And this protest took place after Rosa Parks, an African American and secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, refused to give up her seat on a city bus. At the same time, buses were legally segregated with a white section in the front half and a black section in the back half. However, when buses became crowded, would often take it upon themselves to move to the lane for the white passengers, even if it meant making black passengers give up their seats. This is what happened to Parks on December the 1st, 1955, when she was riding home after a long day of work. When the driver tried to force her to move, she refused, explaining later that she was tired of giving in. The bus driver summoned the police to arrest Parks, and she was later found guilty of violating a city ordinance. With Parks' arrest, civil rights activists in Montgomery had a case from which to mount a boycott, a legal case against segregation in public transportation. The Montgomery Improvement Association called for a year-long boycott of the Montgomery bus system. The leaders of the boycott included the Baptist minister Martin Luther King Jr. The boycott succeeded in its immediate aims, with Rosa Parks' case making it all the way to the US Supreme Court. And it ruled that segregation on public transportation is unconstitutional. The US Supreme Court had also ruled that segregation in public schools is unconditional in Brown versus Board of Education 1954. Even so, in the early 1960s, No broad-based federal laws prohibited similar forms of discrimination in other cities. Racial segregation laws, called Jim Crow laws, remained on the books in many jurisdictions even as they were repeated or struck down the others. Many hotels, restaurants, and facilities did not fall under federal categories for what was considered to be public at the time, so segregation was still legal in many states. Let's discuss on the summary of the lecture that we have done so far. So we see that civil rights movement, condition of the African Americans, and dreams of Martin Luther King. We find that this is a space by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was delivered during the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He delivered the speech at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. This speech expresses his hope for America and the need for change. He opens the speech by stating how happy he is to be with the people there and emphasizes the historical significance of the march by calling it the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. He talks about Abraham Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation 100 years before the march. He calls that proclamation a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. King then comes to the problem faced by the African Americans in 1963, saying that 100 years later they still are not free. Abraham Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address in 1863, and Martin Luther King gave this speech after 100 years, that is 1963. So we see that after 100 years, the condition of the Negro was not changed. Rather, it was deteriorating day by day. And he presented all these issues in front of the audience through his speech. They are sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. He also discusses the poverty by Black Americans. King talks about when the founders of the nation, as we find the word architects of a republic, wrote the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. He says they were writing a promissory note to every American that all men are guaranteed the unalienable rights, unconditional rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that this included black men as well as white. So he talked about the historical document or the legal documents and showed that everything was done for the rights of both the black and the white citizens. States that America defaulted on the check where black citizens are concerned by denying them their rights. So we find from the text the quotation from the space, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. So the check has been dishonored. It is a metaphorical in a sense because the rights of the black people were not materialized in the society, while the white people enjoyed all the benefits, uh, whereas the black people are denied of these benefits in their life. King then adopts a more hopeful tone by adding that the Bank of Justice is not bankrupt. He also states that there is urgency in their cause. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. So these lines are quoted from that space. He uses the seasons as a metaphor to describe this urgency by saying that the legitimate discontent of African Americans is a sweltering summer and that freedom and equality will be an invigorating autumn. So he has presented the seasons and shown how the freedom will come in the guise of the autumn season. He also promises that this protest is not going away. It is not about voicing the problems and then going back to their place. King cautions his people not to commit any wrongful deed. So here we find the non-violence attitude by Martin Luther King. So every time he was very much peaceful in his demonstration. He says, "Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred." So every time he has avoided bitterness and hatred in his speech, and he has told his people not to take any violent measures. He proved that real change could be made without resorting to violence. Though there was much violence during the civil rights movement, he was always in favor of peace and urged all the people to protest peacefully. He also stresses the importance of recognizing white people who want to protest for the same cause, those people that are necessary to its success. King provides some specific goals. He says that they cannot stop marching so long as they suffer police brutality. So they have turned away from hotels so long as they are confined to ghettos. So ghettos means a place where the black Africans lived. He then recognizes the struggle that many of the marchers have already endured and asked them to undertake the struggle again and to have hope that the situation will change one day. Then comes the most famous part of this space, for which it is titled King says his dream is deeply rooted in the American dream. This tells the protesters' rights to equality in America. He says that he dreams that the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. This emphasizes that the need for the black and white Americans to work together. And in one place we say he he says that we cannot work alone. I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. He talks about the importance of faith, that all flesh shall see the glory of the Lord together. That he faith that the faith he says will help them in the struggle they have faced, the struggles they will have to face in near future. So at the end of this space, he has expressed his desire that the he wants that the freedom should ring from every corner of the USA. And he has also talked about some of these states in his space. So he says that this day will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country, tis of the sweet land of liberty of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, and land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. So he wants that freedom should ring from every place of the USA. By realizing the truth, King says America can become a great nation. He begins the next section by mentioning mountainsides throughout the country, repeating, let freedom ring. King ends the space with another line, when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. So we can easily understand the dreams of Martin Luther King. Now we move on to the next part of our presentation is a questions. As you see, short questions: what discrimination between the white and the black does Martin Luther King find? Another short question is, what do you mean by American civil rights movement? And for the broad questions, the students will have to answer. So only one broad question has been given here. but there are some options here. Consider Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream as a charter of freedom and equality for the black people of America. Or in what sense is Luther's speech is a call for freedom and equality for the black people in America? Or write critical appreciation of Luther's speech, I Have a Dream.